The goal of disability studies is to create a world around us that does not frame disability as something lacking, as something in need of curing, or as wrong. It questions all ableist practices and ideas, meaning it is not just enough to have disability student service departments or accessible ramps in public buildings. Instead, the field seeks to bring disabled people to the forefront of society where there are equitable opportunities for variations of expression, inclusion, and happiness. How marginalized identities such as race, class, sexual orientation, gender expression, immigration status, and more interact with disability and create unique experiences is at the core of disability studies, emphasizing that those most marginalized are leading the movement. The field also highlights the different mechanisms of social control used against people with disabilities, including imprisonment. We are able to find multiple connections between disability and imprisonment. First, imprisonment was historically and is currently used particularly against those with mental disabilities, forcing them into institutions away from family and loved ones. Secondly, people with disabilities are targeted by the legal system and punished more punitively. Finally, the experience of incarceration is disabling itself. Mental trauma, dangerous conditions, lack of medical care, and abuse by staff are just some of the ways that incarcerated people become disabled or have their disabilities worsened. Foundational in the study of imprisonment in the United States is the marginalization of Black boys and men. This project will be primarily focusing on their experiences, but that does not seek to diminish the experiences of other people. The American Prison Writing Archive leads with the belief that the experts in the field of carcerality are incarcerated people themselves. By collecting essays, poems, letters, and more written work from incarcerated individuals, the APWA shares firsthand accounts of what it is like to live in jails and prisons. Many of the writers choose to focus on the experience of disability while being incarcerated. Their accounts demonstrate the unique mechanisms of marginalization and dangers that exist in prison. Using the pseudonym Joe Boy, a man incarcerated at a California state prison describes his experience with a cleft palate while incarcerated. He was given surgery while at California Medical Facility, which left his tongue sewn to the roof of his mouth for 33 days and a large hole in the top of his mouth. Not the expected outcome of the surgery, Boy states that no attempt was made to correct the problem, and that his life was permanently altered. When reporting problems of his disability to the staff, he was routinely ignored and dismissed. Another man, writing anonymously, describes, "I'm in fear for my life because if I died tonight at the hands of the security guards and/or medical staff's deliberate indifference while under the unlawful custody at Florida State Prison." However, attempts at changing the system or receiving better care are almost always ignored and retaliated against. Prison officials retaliate against the inmate class all because we have the temerity to request ADA services, activities, and programs. Instead, these men are met with excessive force and violence. This renders incarcerated folks unable to fight for their lives. James Africa writes that these experiences and forced complicity make you become a co-conspirator in your own dehumanization. As the writers described, the experience of disability is incredibly different while incarcerated. You are in a space which has full control over your entire life, including access to health care. While the state renders you immobile, making you pay for what you've done, they assume ownership of you. This guardianship is done as apathetically, violently, and cheaply as possible. As we can see from the authors, society's prevailing idea that disabled people need to be watched and cared for, especially by the state, is predatory. It is not done in any way that is beneficial or takes into account the desire of someone who's incarcerated, but instead becomes a mechanism for profit and control. Additionally, 3 of the men whose work is featured write about their experience as Black men while incarcerated. They each describe that they were targeted as Black men and that they experienced racism from prison guards. When a Black man is incarcerated and disabled, their experiences are impacted. Each man's story demonstrated that their experiences of lack of medical care and retaliation were motivated by racism. Disability studies not only encourages us to change our idea that disabled people need institutionalized care, but also encourages a broader view into our definition of incarceration. Incarceration takes many forms: prisons, jails, detention centers, institutions for the intellectually disabled, treatment centers, psychiatric hospitals, and even chemical incarceration. By expanding our idea of what incarceration can entail, we can also broaden our understanding of the prison industrial complex. When a disabled person is incarcerated, there are people making money from their housing, medical care, and living expenses. Thus, the prison industrial complex becomes the carceral industrial complex, including the incarceration of disabled people and the ways that people profit off of them. Therefore, disability studies provides us with new mechanisms for understanding the world, ensuring that all people are included and accounted for.